Sound check. YouTube English. Sound check. YouTube French.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Madam Vice Chair.
Morning, Eli. How are you?
Good, living the dream.
Amazing.
So for item number 4, Councillor, we have a technical amendment prepared by staff. I'm hoping you can move that when we come to item number 4.
Sure, no problem.
All right, thank you very much. So Councillor Kitts have the copy of that motion, right?
Yeah, I apologize, Kelly. I'm just seeing, I don't know if Heather responded already to your message, but yes, that's fine. Apologies for not responding.
Okay, not a problem. Just want to make sure you have a copy of it, that's all.
Yeah, no, I've got it here.
Okay.
Do you want me to read the whole thing when it comes to it, or just the, guess so, it's kind of short.
It is short, but maybe if you read it so they know what we're talking about, really.
Yeah, okay, sounds good.
So Kelly, Mr. Vice is on behalf of the applicant. He will be answering question, or on behalf of the city, or who's he? Adam, did you have your hand up, sir?
I was just going to answer the question, Councillor, about Mr. Vice, but if you have the answer, then.
So no, so Mr. Vice, he will be on behalf of the applicant if we have any question for the applicant. Is that correct?
He's on behalf of that motion that Mr. Mark sent you with regards to Carey Hill. Yeah, you would speak on behalf of the property owner if necessary.
Okay. So basically that motion to resolve an issue was in 1999 by the former township of West Park.
That's correct.
Okay. Good morning, Rawson, Scott.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. So it's just almost 10 o'clock and I believe we're waiting for Councillor DeRoos to join us. Good morning, Sean.
Morning, nice to see you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We'd like to call our meeting to order for Thursday, April 7, 2022 Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. The chair statement, the public hearing for OP and zoning item. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as item 2 and 4 on today's agenda. For the item just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submission before the amendment are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the applications for zoning and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comment on these amendments prior to the consideration by the City Council on February 9, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Is that February 9th is correct, I think? Okay.
Mr. Chair, I believe the items from this agenda will be rising to council on the 13th of April,
13th.
unless otherwise noted on the agenda.
That's good. Thank you, Caitlin. And notes to committee member, obviously this meeting is still virtual meeting and we don't have to go through the Zoom protocol, but council are reminded if you have any motion on any of the item listed today, please send a copy to us ahead of the public delegation so the committee members and staff have an opportunity to review and necessary clarify your motion during the discussion of the matter. Thank you. So I'm going to do a little roll call myself this time. We receive a message, Councillor Meehan, she will not be joining us today. She's a little bit under the weather. So we'll go with the roll call. Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Derouz. I thought I saw Councillor. Okay. Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Vice Chair Pitts.
Here.
And myself here. So we'll go through the consent agenda first. And declaration of interest. Here now. Confirmation of minutes. Minutes 29 minutes of the February 3rd, 2022 of the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. Is the minute confirmed?
Confirmed.
Thank you. So planning, real estate and economic development. So item number 1 is the high performance development standard. We have a presentation and we have speakers on the item. So we'll hold item number 1. Item number 2 is a zoning bylaw amendment, 1144 and 1180 8th Line Road in Osgood Ward. So the report recommendation that the Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 1144 8th Line for the purpose of rezoning the land from parks and open space zone, subzone A, O1A to agriculture zone AG to permit an agricultural use as detailed in document 2. Document 2 is the Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 1188th Line Road for the purpose of rezoning land. So this is obviously one of the surplus. It's been going back to agriculture. We have no speaker on this item, and I believe the councillor aware of this item and he's in support of it. Can we carry item number 2?
Carried.
Thank you. Sorry, I believe for item number 2, we carried that we have Jonah Bond on behalf of the applicant, but since we don't have any and we carried the item, just want to say thank you for Mr. Bond to be available for us. Item number 3 is Thomas Gamble Municipal Drain Appointment of Engineer. That's also in Osgood Ward and Gloucester South Nepean. And the report recommendation that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend that Council appoint Mr. Andy Robinson, P. Engineer of Robinson Consulting Inc., as an engineer of record to prepare a report under Section 78(1) of the Drainage Act to inform Council on the current status of the Thomas Gamble Municipal Drain and whether one or more of the projects listed under Section 78(1.1) as required for the latter use, maintenance, or repair of the drainage work of the land or roads. And item 2, so we have Mr. Ryan here. If we have any question, if it's not, can we carry item number 3? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. And item number 4, and that's the City of Ottawa Zoning Bylaw 2008-250 amendment. And we do have a technical amendment prepared by staff, and I'm going to ask the Vice Chair to read this technical amendment.
Sure. I'll just skip over the first whereas, but whereas the report recommends multiple amendments to the zoning bylaw 2008-250 with ARAC considering those located in rural areas as set out in recommendation 1 and planning committee approving the other amendments as outlined in recommendation 2. Whereas since the release of the report with the ARAC agenda on March 28th, staff have revised the report to add an additional anomaly for consideration by the planning committee, and the revised report was released with the planning committee agenda on April 4th. Whereas while these changes do not impact the amendments to be considered for approval by ARAC, the committee should receive the revised report. Therefore, be it resolved that the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee receive and consider the revised version of report at today's meeting.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And the report recommendation, item number 1, that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve amendments to zoning bylaw 2008-250 as shown in document 1 and detailed in document 3. So item number 2 has already been approved by planning committee. Item number 3, that the planning and agriculture and rural affairs committees approve the consultation detail section of this report be included as part of the brief explanation in a summary of written and oral public submissions to be prepared by the Office of the City Clerk and submitted to Council in a report titled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submission for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of April 27, 2022, subject to submissions received between the publication of this report and the time of Council decision. So we have no presentation, no delegation on this item. First, can we accept the technical amendment from the Vice Chair?
Carried.
Okay. And on the item, carried as
Carried.
amended.
Carried.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Item number 5, status update, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee inquiries and motion for the period ending March 25th, 2020. Receive. I guess this is an update. Thank you. I do have motions we need to waive the rules, but we can come back to it at the end of the meeting because right now we have we need to go to item number 1 and have a presentation from staff and go through the 3 speakers who sign up to speak. So with that, we'll go to Mr. Herwire. I believe you have the presentation for us.
Yes. Good morning, Chair, members of committee. Thank you. While the presentation's loading, I'll just provide some brief introductory remarks, and Rebecca Hagan, our file lead, will be walking you through the presentation shortly. So most committee members and those present will recall this item was considered at Planning Committee on March 10th, where it was recommended for approval. There was also a motion tabled that will rise to council on April 13th. Last week, staff circulated a number of documents to members of council and our stakeholders on this file that spoke to the motion, the implications of it. There's information on costing, thresholds where the standard would apply, and a number of things that Rebecca will walk you through. So I will also just mention that Rebecca is supported this morning by Melissa Jordan Conway from our Climate Change and Resiliency team, and Dr. Stowe and Martha Copestake from our Natural Systems. So I'll turn it over to Rebecca to provide a brief presentation, and there'll be a bit of a focus on how it applies to the rural areas specifically. Thanks.
Good morning. Thanks, Don. Yeah, so I'll just jump right in. So next slide. So I'll be going over briefly, again, as a reminder, the staff report recommendations, a bit of the background, the benefits and specific to the implications specific to the rural area, and then going into the engagement process and what we heard, and then the next steps for the standard. Next slide. The first four recommendations deal with approving the metrics for site plan control and plan of subdivision, as well as the implementation plan and supporting legislative changes to the site plan control bylaw. Next slide. The fifth recommendation, next slide. The fifth recommendation directs next steps to advance the standard and associated projects, including updating to the green building policy, ongoing monitoring and reporting, incentive program development, future updates to the high performance development standard, and considerations for the high performance development standard where reduced submission requirements are enabled. Next slide. The sixth recommendation deals with working with the province to advance objectives at the building code level. Next slide. The high performance development standard is a collection of voluntary and required metrics that raise the performance of new building projects to advance sustainable and resilient design. The Planning Act gives municipalities in Ontario authority to use site plan control and plan of subdivision to review priority elements of developments. Ottawa's high performance development standard is enabled through policy direction within Ottawa's new official plan. Over the last 17 years, starting in 2006, 8 municipalities in Ontario have implemented similar standards. Ottawa has worked and learned from these municipalities to develop the high performance development standard. These standards all use the same legislative authorities as proposed in Ottawa's high performance development standard. Next slide. The standard will shift the industry to consider sustainability impacts earlier in the project, where more opportunities to change the design. This shift will help to grow the green job sector and build capacity to meet future building code changes. Collectively, the standard aims to advance the climate change mitigation and adaptation priorities of the Climate Change Master Plan, Energy Evolution, Climate Resiliency Strategy, as well as other corporate objectives related to public health, ecology, and accessibility. Next slide. The standard does not apply to projects pursuing building permit only, and the standard is split into two tiers. Tier 1 is required and Tier 2 is voluntary. Tier 1 applies to all new plan of subdivision applications and all site applications, except in the rural area where it is applied to complex applications only. Tier 2 is encouraged, and tools and strategies to incentivize and increase adoption are under review and will require further internal and external consultation. The HPDS will be phased in over time to build staff and industry capacity while still accounting for climate change targets. The standard is proposed to be reviewed every 4 years, subject to council approval, with the energy metric advancing in each update as shown on the diagram on the slide. Next slide. The majority of site plan applications in the rural area are small, generally consisting of coach houses and or minor additions or changes to commercial sites. There were, over the last 2 years, so between 2020 and 2021, there were 3 new complex applications in the rural area. Last year, 2 commercial, and of those, 2 were commercial warehouses and 1 was a light industrial use. The rest of the applications were either standard small rural residential, standard or small residential. The small residential are made up primarily of small residential building additions such as coach houses. Next slide. The standard covers some key features of sustainable and resilient design, energy, health, ecology, resiliency, waste, and transportation. This builds on interrelated policies and guidelines already in place and under development in Ottawa today. For site plan control, there are 12 metrics required under Tier 1 and 22 metrics required under Tier 2, listed here. Next slide. Plan of subdivision has 3 mandatory metrics in Tier 1 and 5 voluntary metrics in Tier 2. Next slide. Engagement on the project started with energy evolution, continued throughout the official plan, and got very specific during the project development. A series of 8 workshops were held with developers, architects, and sustainability consultants on the proposed standard. In November 2021, the draft HPDS was published on Engage Ottawa. Staff received comments, held public information sessions, and 2 Q&A sessions. Next slide. Throughout consultation, the industry and public raised key concerns over the standard. We have tried to mitigate these concerns where possible, as described in more detail in the report. Strategies to respond to the concerns include phasing the plan and next steps proposed in the report. Next slide. The next step, staff will start implementing the plan and begin updating the green building policy, develop an incentive program, monitor and report on the standard, provide updates to the standard every 4 years, provide considerations for the high performance development standard where reduced submission requirements are enabled, and work with the province to advance the climate change in the Ontario Building Code. Next slide. So thank you. And I know for some of you who are at planning committee as well, that was a little bit of a repeat, but I wanted to make sure we had a good foundation for anybody that wasn't at planning committee that is on the agriculture and rural affairs committee. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for your presentation. So we'll go directly to the public delegation, and we start with Daniel Buckles. Good morning, sir. And you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to speak this morning. The Green Building Standard is a welcome addition to the city's policy toolbox. It seeks to make buildings and building lots greener, which will help people save money in the long term through energy efficiency, and create healthier buildings and help reduce Ottawa's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. The draft also includes requirements for tree canopy and tree species selection in the context of landscaping plans for new construction. This is an improvement over the current situation because it puts trees on the agenda at the design stage, at least for larger new buildings. I'm presenting today on behalf of a dozen technical experts, landscape architects, botanists, arborists, and owners of plant nurseries to call on this committee and council to increase the native biodiversity target for plants on the at-grade landscaped site of new buildings that are subject to these new rules. The current target of 50% is too low to compensate for serious biodiversity loss in both rural and urban landscapes. And it fails to provide leadership on biodiversity to the building and landscaping industry. The reasons native species are important should be evident. Plants are the foundation of healthy ecosystems. In our ecozone, trees historically make up the bulk of the plant biomass. If the majority of those trees are not native species, the rest of the native ecosystem, including pollinators, cannot survive. Rural livelihoods depend directly on native tree biodiversity. Native trees are better adapted to local conditions and usually provide better erosion control and survival in extreme conditions. They harbor natural enemies of crop pests and can support pollinators for fruit and vegetable crops at times when they are not in flower. Urban and suburban spaces also benefit and are becoming more and more important as biodiversity refuges. Research in urban landscapes has shown that a minimum 70% of native plant biomass is required to support the density of the insect population that songbirds need to successfully rear their young. For the already reduced songbird population to rebound, an even higher percentage of native plant species is necessary. A clear signal from the city is needed to launch the shift to greater native plant biodiversity in Ottawa's new subdivisions in villages and in peri-urban Ottawa. There's no reason why a significantly higher target cannot be set, which will help protect rural and urban landscapes from further erosion of the biodiversity needed to support healthy ecosystems and the agricultural livelihoods these help preserve. Consequently, we ask that this committee and council bring forward a target of 80% native plants on sites subject to the rules of the Green Standard. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Buckles. I see Councillor Menard. Councillor Menard.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And normally wouldn't engage too much for the committee, obviously, rural representatives here. I just, on this topic, I wanted to ask Daniel about staff's comment around the native tree species that we had heard last time. And just to go into that, so I think city staff had talked about that they believe that the HPDS higher target for native trees is not practical for a couple of reasons, or needs to be investigated a little bit more. One, they said that the non-native, non-invasive species are needed for some plant environments, such as clay soils. And then they also indicated that a higher native species target would require the city to change its procurement practices, noting that the nursery industry would need time to improve their stock supply. So just, can you go into, I suspect you've looked at those and have some ideas around those two pieces of information staff shared. Can you just go into, what you think would be successful in terms of addressing those concerns staff laid out?
Thank you, Chair and Council. The first point about the need for non-native, non-invasive species for some kinds of settings is not something that we're disputing at all. There is a need. It's really a question of the level, the scope that is provided for non-native, non-invasive species. It's much greater than it needs to be to address those very few specific settings where non-native, non-invasive trees or other kinds of plants might be suitable. There's an incredible diversity available in the native category, literally hundreds of species in the North American, northeastern North America, native and what are also called near natives, that are options and that can be drawn from. Many fabulous flowering trees and plants that work well in a lot of different environments. And I'll give you just one example. I know that the European linden, small leaf linden, is one of the species that the city thinks is needed. But there are many alternates within the native and non-native category for the European linden. There's something called the American basswood, which is native throughout Eastern North America. And then there are a whole bunch of other full-sized hardwood trees that would do just as well as the European linden: sugar maples, black maple, red maple, silver maple, different kinds of oaks, hickories, black walnut. The range of options is huge, and it's simply not being used effectively. And while some scope is needed for non-natives, it doesn't need to be anywhere near that 50% level to meet the needs that are there. Regarding the second point, procurement procedures, to me, that's would be a case of the tail wagging the dog. The procurement procedures need to show leadership, and they could be phased in as well. And so I don't see that as a very compelling reason to set a very low target for species diversity. Nurseries can adapt, and those species are, the native and near natives are available. So let's make use of them. Let's provide some leadership on this very important point that will impact rural landscapes as well as the urban environment.
Thank you for that. That's an interesting idea about phased in approach. I think Toronto has done that, where, so that procurement can kind of catch up to the desired level. And so a phased in approach might be a nice middle ground, where we start with the proposal that's in front of us with staff, and then have direction to phase it up to a higher percentage over time, so they can catch up with the procurement model that they've laid out. So that gives food for thought, and I appreciate. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, on that point, indeed, that does provide some options. But note too that staff have just reminded us that there is no formal update to the standard for 4 years, according to their plan. So a phase-in would need to recognize that we're not talking about 4 years from now to improve the level of diversity, but rather phase in starting from the get-go, and setting a higher target already provides a direction.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Mr. Buckles. Thank you very much. And our next presenter, Marion, I see you're on behalf of cafes. I want to begin by saying thank you to you and to the group and member of the cafes. Marion, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have a presentation coming. There we are. Good. I am just a little second. I am, Chair Councillor, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the High Performance Development Standard. My name is Marion Sikierski, and I have worked with Angela Keller-Herzog and Joan Freeman of CAFES over the last few months on analyzing the HPDS and listening to many community representatives. I would like to thank city staff, and in particular Rebecca Hagan, who has been quick to respond with comprehensive comments and explanations to every question we had about the HPDS. Next slide, please. Before I go into the details, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture again, and the reason why we're even considering the standard. The climate crisis. Sadly, the world's climate is nearing major tipping points. Once these tipping points are reached, they are irreversible in human timescales, and in some cases can have catastrophic consequences for our climate. So not surprisingly, the IPCC emphasizes in its latest report the urgency of immediate and more ambitious action. and that half measures are no longer an option. Cities, you play a crucial role in this. So the HPDS is a great opportunity to make a difference and help Ottawa transition to a net zero and resilient future, and follow through on addressing the climate emergency you declared in 2019. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, the HPDS is lacking in a number of areas. The issues I and others have raised at the Planning Committee in March are that this standard will not apply to a large proportion of new buildings. Second, the standard's ambition is in many respects behind Toronto's latest Green Standard version 4. And that's because Ottawa modeled itself on the older version 3. Also, monitoring and enforcement mechanisms, as well as incentives, all key aspects of the standard are still missing, but I understand the city is working on coming up with those, and I hope they will be bold and effective. Next slide, please. Today, I want to focus on just two aspects: energy efficiency and electric vehicle charging. These two are key to making the net zero transition that is so important to avert a climate crisis. Next slide. As of now, the energy efficiency requirements of this standard are limited to buildings over 2,000 square meters. I understand there is a motion in preparation that will extend energy efficiency requirements to a larger proportion of buildings. So without going into more detail, I hope you will support this motion when it is presented. Next slide, please. Now, electric vehicle infrastructure is the point where net zero buildings and net zero mobility intersect. And it's hugely important to be ambitious to reach Ottawa's net zero goals. Also, because retrofitting electric car chargers is so much more expensive than building right from the beginning. In particular for your constituents in rural areas, it is essential to have access to fast charging facilities. They tend to travel longer distances and therefore need to be able to top up on the go. So fast charging level 2 or 3 is really essential here. Now, currently the HPDS does not contain any mandatory requirements for electric vehicle charging, and we are asked to wait for a zoning update in 2024. Now, that's almost halfway through the most important decade when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to take again a step back and look at the bigger picture and see how Canada fits in internationally. And I must say, I was surprised by the data I found. While Canada has doubled its share in EV sales in 2021, it still lags shockingly far behind most major developed economies. I've provided some details for you in the slides. Interestingly, in 2019, Canada was at par with the European Union in electric car sales. But within 2 years, European countries surged ahead to have a much bigger share of electric car sales than Canada. Which brings us to charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. I've looked at EV charging availability and regulations elsewhere. In terms of availability, I've compared Ottawa with cities of a similar size, and you can see the data on the slides. Stockholm shows 2,100 publicly accessible chargers, aiming for 4,000 at the end of this year. Munich has over 1,000, with many more in the rural areas surrounding the city. Now, Ottawa has a maximum of about 223. You can see for yourself that Ottawa is far behind. Now, the problem is that we can't achieve the projected and necessary EV growth if charging facilities don't keep up. Next slide, please. That's why I also had a look at building regulations with regards to charging. The EU now requires all new buildings to have pre-cabling for EV charging. Next slide, please.
Marian, you have reached your time. If you can wrap up, please.
Okay. Same goes for the US and even Toronto. Next slide, please. And also Toronto and other municipalities are now requiring pre-cabling or working EV chargers. So I hope that you can find a way to include EV charging in the HPDS. I understand there are limitations due to the legal authority, but if all else fails, maybe you can look at making external chargers obligatory for new buildings.
Thank you, Marian.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now I have the screen back. There's no question. I just want to say thank you, Marian, for your presentation and speaking on behalf of cafes. Thank you. Our next speaker is Raymond Doherty on behalf of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa.
Folks, can you go to slide 4, please? So, so I am skipping the first slides there because I presented them before. And essentially what the first slide says is that we are seeing for 2025, we're seeing automakers globally predict to produce over 30% of their new cars will be electric at that time. So we're seeing a massive wave of electric vehicles hitting the market. Why is this an issue for rural areas? Well, the more you drive, the more EVs are a good financial option for you. And we know that people in rural areas tend to have longer commutes. Everything is further for them, so they need to drive more. The biggest impediment, so we're thinking that based on our calculations, that by 2030, only 8 years from now, about 30% of the fleet, so that's not sales, that's the fleet, will be electric. So that means at least 30% of the new housing will require charging. Charging at home is the cheapest and easiest solution, and it's a big barrier to adoption. We hear all the time of people telling us that they would love to have an EV, but they can't charge at home, so they're not buying an EV and hoping to be able to do so in the future. Next slide, please. So in Ottawa specifically, there are 3 parts of the HPDS that I would like to see some improvements in. First one is move EV charging to tier 1, make it mandatory immediately. We had at the provincial level a requirement for EV charging 4 years ago. It was removed by the Ford government, and we are now many years behind other jurisdictions who have implemented mandatory pre-wiring, at least in many areas in North America and elsewhere in the world, like Miriam said earlier. We need to catch up on this. We can't wait for 2024. So we're suggesting to use the existing zoning text that has been used in other municipalities and implement it in Ottawa. Next slide, please. The next point is that the standard in Tier 2 provides for new builds with level 1 charging. We believe that's inappropriate for new buildings. Level 1 is a good compromise for existing buildings where they have some issues, whether it's cost or capacity, that keep them from going to level 2. But we believe that vehicle to grid will be a large market going in the future as a solution to store intermittent green energy. So and level 2 is required. So 230 volt charging is required for a vehicle to grid. So we would like the standard to reflect that. We're not aware of any other jurisdiction that is allowing level 1. So we don't believe we should be doing that here. Next slide, please. So the other thing that's in the standard that's a bit fuzzy and I would like to see clarified is a metering requirement. The current text talks about revenue metering capability so that meters may be installed, okay, to apportion the energy costs. The issue there is that if you're having to use, based on this, utility grade metering, that will add at least $2,000 of extra cost per charging station, which is cost that's really not necessary. So what we are suggesting is that the text be modified so that software-based metering is acceptable. That should be enough to apportion the cost, as the any issues with the accuracy of the metering would likely be similar across different vehicles and would not affect the apportionment of charges. So we're suggesting that this be changed to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where a ton of additional cost is added in new bills that's not really required. And this would partially, well, actually more than balance out the extra cost of putting level 2 in place from the get-go instead of level 1. So I think that's my last slide. So yes, so thank you, Chair, and that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Raymond, for your presentation. And I see there's no question for you. Thank you very much. And we'll go to our colleague, whether on committee member or non-member, if you have any question for our staff at this point. Councillor Delrouz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry I'm having a internet connection problem, but I hope you can hear me on that.
We can hear you. Maybe you should call your councillor about bad internet. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question for staff. From my understanding from the report, we do have an Ontario Building Code regulation that was updated in 2012, and we follow the building code now since then. And then now the report asking for 25% more efficiency from what we already have. Now this is it come under, if I'm my understanding, staff or legal can answer this question. Are you pushing this under the Planning Act or under the Building Code regulation?
It's under the Planning Act regulation that the energy efficiency modeling requirements are being applied.
Thanks, Rebecca. And is that legal? I'm sure we're discussing it with legal, and this is something above and beyond the building code regulation, if I'm not mistaken.
Do you want me to answer that, Mr. Chair, or would you like Rebecca to answer first?
Please, no, you can go ahead, please.
So, Mr. Chair, this is being pursued under the Planning Act, as staff have indicated, which is a separate piece of legislation from the building code and its associated regulations.
Thank you, Christina. My next question will be, Mr. Chair, is if this is it's been approved and we vote on it today and it goes to council and we implement that, is a staff going to be able to enforce that, or we need to hire a consultant or engineer to be able to enforce what we are really putting in place?
Rebecca?
The question is, do you have it in-house, or are we going to hire someone, consultant or an engineer, for us to be able to enforce what we are requesting right now from the builders?
The report recommends having a third-party energy model consultant to support with the review of the energy modeling reports. So it would be outside.
Outsourced. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a couple. I am not against really efficiency or adding more policies, but the thing is, the federal government budget today will be front and center about affordability, and then the government, the provincial government and the federal government, they've been really working hard to making sure homes will be affordable. This is all the added cost that we are going to cost for us to implement those. As we heard from the industry, it's going to translate down to the consumer, because there is no builder. It's going to take the cost of those a new addition that what the province really want us to do based on the building code of Ontario. So Mr. Chair, there is a lots of work to be done with this. It's going to cost the city money. We're adding another layer yet, because this is going to not be enforced under the building code. If you look at from the presentation, the site plan and all the approval has to be submit way before the approval. So there is we're adding really more steps to the approval, and it's going to delay things. So for that, Mr. Chair, I cannot support that. I'm sorry, maybe for my lengthy question, but that's where I stand on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor DeRose. And Councilor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Not a question, but there's several committee members here who took part in a 4-hour conversation at Planning Committee on this. And I just wanted to say first, certainly not as much discussion happening in this meeting as we had at Planning Committee, but I hope that delegations who've come out don't consider less of a discussion here to equal less of an interest from committee members. But we have had quite a long debate. On the cost, I think I just wanted to echo what I said at Planning Committee a few weeks back. There is a cost, and it will mean some increase in the cost to build a new home or a new building. It's hard to quantify exactly what that is, but there's also some significant benefits that will result in less cost down the road. One that I'll mention is just resiliency to climate change, which is significant, especially in rural areas of our city. And when we're looking at affordability, I think we also have to look beyond just the initial purchase price of a home or a building and look towards the long-term lifespan and replacement costs of a building or ongoing maintenance. And I can see where some of the measures captured by staff in this proposal would have long-term cost benefits to a property owner or a homeowner down the road. So I always keep that in mind as well. It's not just the one-off purchase price, but the ongoing ability to keep maintenance costs lower as well. So thank you, staff, for the report on this. I will be supporting it as I did at Planning Committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Any other question or comment from my colleague? Councillor Menard?
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll really keep it short. Appreciate this item being here. We've worked with staff on a motion for council, which is supported, and I think I'll follow up on I've been following up on the 2 points that were raised around the electric charging stations and then the native tree species, just offline with staff. But just wanted to say, really appreciate staff's work on this thus far and where we can get from now into the next 4-year period. So just a thank you for the work there.
Thank you, Councillor Menard, and thank you again for joining us today in this meeting. And just to echo a little bit of Councillor Gower's comment, really, if we don't see quite a bit of interest from the rural areas, much we've seen in the other part of the city, because as you saw on the slide, there's only 3 applications in 2 years in the rural area will have impact by this. So obviously we are one team, one city, and I mean, when I don't have to bring back to you how important resiliency is. I had to deal with 2 floods and 1 tornado in 4 years. So building something sustainable for the future, for the environment is important to all of us. So I'm not sure if we need to go A's and A's on this report, but my understanding, Christine, Madam Inta, this is going back to council, and it has both on the Planning Committee and Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend to council. Basically, we can just carry this item, all of it, all the report, and we'll go to council with a dissent from Councillor DeRose on the report. Is any other dissent, or do we need A's and A's on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, okay, so there's no A's and A's required. So on the item carry with a dissent from Councillor DeRose. Thank you. Go back to our. So we do have a motion. I'm gonna ask the vice chair to take the chair now, because this motion is first of all, we need to waive the rules to deal with this motion today. Can we waive the rules on it? Is it timely?
Carried.
Thank you. So let me read the motion, and I think I might have to ask Adam Brown to give a little bit of history on it, because so that the following motion be considered today's meeting pursuant to subsection 89 proceeds by law, whereas lot 29, plan 768-141 Carey Hill was registered as a lot of plan of subdivisions, and was due to the presence and accessory structure with respect to a lot 29, there was a possible incompliance with the respect to the zoning, and whereas to eliminate the possible incompliance, lot 29, 30, and 31 were deregistered as a lot on plan of subdivision with an enactment of bylaw of the Township of West Carleton. And whereas a sale of 141 Carey Hill, lot 29, has occurred, and whereas any structures accessory to lot 29 are to be removed, therefore be it resolved that the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend to Council that the bylaw 49 of 1999 of the Township of West Carleton be repealed in respect of lot 29, plan 768. I do believe the proponent has have a legal representation if we have any question for. But before we go to any question, I'm going to ask Mr. Brown to give us a little bit of background on this item. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we were advised that the owner of lot 29 wishes to convey it separately. Currently, from my understanding, the same owner owns lots 29, 30, and 31, but they wish to convey lot 29 separately. And when there was some research done by their legal counsel or the purchaser's legal counsel, it was determined that West Carleton Township back in 1999 had deregistered the subdivision for these three particular lots due to some sort of issue regarding compliance with zoning. And I don't know what exactly happened in 1999, Mr. Chair, but that was the solution that the township took at the time. Now we're confident that lot 29 itself is in compliance or can be put in compliance with the zoning bylaw and can be conveyed separately. And Mr. Mark and perhaps Ms. Enta as well has done some research to determine that in fact we can repeal a part of that 1999 bylaw to allow such a conveyance to proceed. And Ms. Enta may need to correct me or update. No, she's shaking her head no. So it's kind of a historical anomaly from the township days. And by repealing part of this bylaw, we will allow the current owner to be able to convey it to the new purchaser and still be in compliance with the zoning bylaw. So staff have no concerns with the motion.
Well, thank you very much for this clarification. Any question from my colleague? Seeing us, can we carry this motion?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I believe item 5 we didn't. I spoke about quickly the Office of the City Clerk status update, Agricultural Affairs Committee inquiries and motion for the period ending March 25th, 2022. That the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee receive this report for information. Can we receive it?
Receive.
Thank you. I believe we have someone registered to speak at the open mic session.
Chair, I do have a motion as well, if you recall.
Yes, you're right, Councillor Moffat. My apology, I don't have it in front of me, but I trust staff. You have it, Kelly? You know, can you share it with us, Scott, Councillor Moffat, or Adam, or somebody share it on the screen?
Yeah, so we have to waive the rules first. It's related to an appeal of a Committee of Adjustment decision to the Untitled Land Tribunal. So
yes, first of all, thank you to you and staff for briefing me and the Vice Chair on this one. I'm fully brief on it, and unfortunately, I don't have the motion in front of me. If you have it and you can share it on a screen, then we can waive the rule to receive it. Adam, or do you have the motion?
Mr. Chair, I had forwarded a draft of the motion, but I have not seen the final version of the motion.
Okay.
Okay.
Councillor Moffat, you have it?
I do have the motion in front of me. It was the same. It's the same as the draft.
Okay, so why don't you read it for us to waive the rule first?
Yeah, go ahead.
So can we move? Can we receive this item? Waive the rules to receive this item? See, yes. Go ahead, Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. So it's a bit of a unique situation, something I've never had to bring before, but here we are. It's as I mentioned, it's a Committee of Adjustment decision that the city has appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So I'll just read it because it kind of provides the context of it, and I can touch on that, any additional further information if required. So whereas the Committee of Adjustment hearing of December 8th, 2021 reviewed a consent to sever application for 1962 Brophy Drive to modify the property lines of an existing historical residential lot in the agricultural resource area. And whereas there is no net new lot creation, and if 2 homes were built today in the current lot configuration, the same impacts occur if 2 homes were built under the proposed configuration. And whereas despite the planning staff report indicating an objection, panel 3 of the Committee of Adjustment unanimously approved the consent application in a decision dated December 17th, 2021. And whereas city staff have initiated an appeal of the Committee of Adjustment's decision in this matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And whereas, in my opinion, the negative impacts of this application are not sufficient to warrant an appeal. Therefore, be it resolved that Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend to Council that legal services staff be directed to withdraw the city's appeal of the Committee of Adjustment decision of this consent to sever application at 1962 Brophy Drive. So it's a bit of a confusing one because the policy is pretty clear. We don't permit severances in the agriculture resource area. This, though, comes along with another application. So there's two land parcels. One's a much larger parcel, one's a smaller parcel. And essentially what's happening is that there's a bit of a land swap, so to speak, between the two, the larger and the smaller parcel, to reposition where the smaller parcel actually is as it relates to Third Line Road and its frontage onto Third Line Road. As it stands today, 2 homes could be built on these 2 pieces of property. As it stands with the decision of the Committee of Adjustment, 2 homes could still be built on this same piece of property, but just in different configurations to the smaller lot versus the larger lot. So obviously I fully respect the policy position of staff, but I do not believe that the Committee of Adjustment erred in their decision making here. I think they looked at the situation. I think they saw that there's no net loss in agricultural land because of the situation that exists today. There is no new creation of a dwelling lot in the rural area, in the agricultural resource area. So as such, I think it's safe for this application to move forward and to respect the decision of the Committee of Adjustment and withdraw the city's appeal of that decision.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Moffat. Obviously, I want to thank you for having a meeting with me and the Vice Chair. I want to thank Adam and staff also for meeting with us, explaining the situation. Mr. Brown, I don't know if you wish to comment or not, but if you like, I'll give you the opportunity. I know staff's position, as you mentioned, Councillor Moffat, they are the custodian of the policy and they follow the policy. My biggest concern was loss of agricultural land, and I think you said it 3 times. There will be no net loss to agricultural land with this. It's just a policy. A staff obviously respecting the policy, but on this one off, I feel personally comfortable to not to go forward with the appeal. So I'm not sure if any other council have any comment on. If it's not, that's my position. I would support the councillor's motion on this one. Do you see any question to Councillor Moffat or to staff? None? Can we carry the motion? From council? Okay. Thank you very much. So with that, that's no other business, but we do have our next meeting is Thursday, May 5th, and is the person for the open mic present is here? Sorry, I didn't get the name. Is Mike? Mike, okay. Mr. Baggett, I believe you have registered to speak at the open mic session. You have 5 minutes to speak. Go ahead.
Could we have the slides loaded, please?
Oh,
thank you.
Already.
Thank you for the time to speak today. Rural residents have heard loud and clear that Ottawa wants to get it right when it comes to zoning for wind turbines and has been given that power by the province. This is definitely an opportunity for Ottawa to show leadership. Next slide, please. So I'm here representing Ottawa Wind Concerns. We've been an organization of volunteers which started in North Core in 2008. I joined the board in 2011, and we've been briefing over the years some of the councillors who are on this committee since about 2012. Next slide, please. So there are about 2,500 wind turbines represented by the green dots here, and you can see they're mostly on the shores of the Great Lakes or possibly on in the Saint Laurent on Wolf Island. And though the wind does blow intermittently, this is definitely where the wind blows. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about 3 things: human health concerns associated with wind turbines, the industrial safety of those turbines, and the need for environmental protection. Next slide, please. So this is the most important slide that I'm probably going to present to you today. I remember going to a meeting in November 2014 with Health Canada on Laurier, and they presented their report where they'd studied health concerns, and I have to say it was not the best designed report I've ever seen, best designed study. And there's two things that I remember specifically. First of all, they described the health impacts that you see in front of you: headaches, noise, panic, vertigo, anxiety, etc., etc. These are all categorized as annoyance. If I had those, I would be pretty annoyed. And the second thing they said was that their study did not really set out to prove cause and effect. As I said, it wasn't the best designed study in the world. And the result of this study was that they were frequently misquoted, no fault of theirs necessarily, as showing that there was no link between IWTs and health concerns. 7 years later, 3 researchers categorically proved cause and effect using the established Bradford Hill scientific method, and they documented direct cause and effect. I remember in 2018 reading hundreds and hundreds of reports under the Freedom of Information Act, of instant reports of people complaining about turbines, and you actually had to read what they said about how they felt, feeling vibrations in their gut, not just hearing it, putting up heavy curtains, drapes, to block out the shadow flicker, to eliminate strobe effect. There is only one way to mitigate those health impacts, and that is to use distance to control noise, vibration, and flicker. Next slide, please. With respect to industrial safety, these turbines are big. People don't realize how big they are. They're really big. If you've never seen one up close, drive an hour from City Hall, 70 kilometers down to North Stormont, and stand under one. The blades are about 450 feet long. That's about a bit longer than 2 Ottawa Senators' rinks, laid end to end. And they're about up to 550 feet high. And no local fire department in the world is putting out a blaze 500 feet in the air with the equipment we have. The second point shows about 11, and you might say only 11, failures which have been documented of these things. But every one of these failures is a major incident. And a picture being worth 1,000 words, we're going to very quickly look at what these all look like. Next slide, please. So here we have the result, you can see, of foundations not being able to support hundreds and hundreds of tons of steel, and the tower literally collapsing. Next slide. Here you see the result of a blade shearing and literally carving the tower in half, and that's what a tower hit by a blade looks like. Next slide. So when blades shear, according to the multi-municipal working group that studied this, debris the size of a car flies hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meters. Next slide. Here we can see...
Mr. Beckett, if you can wrap up, please. Your time is up, but go ahead, wrap up, please.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We need environmental protection for birds. Next slide, please. Okay, we're getting to the last 2 slides. I'll be extremely quick. The Green Energy Act had setbacks of 550 meters. They were never changed. The setbacks from public roads and railways were not enough. Turbines have grown by over 50%. Modern setbacks have changed in the last few years. Here are some examples from around the world, and there are references there which show what more typical setbacks are now as best practices. Last slide, please.
That was the last slide. Okay.
Sorry, my apologies. This is the last slide. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So our proposal is that 2-kilometer setbacks to property lines are appropriate. 1 kilometer setbacks to public roads, railways are necessary, and that we need environmental protection studies, not just for birds, but I understand that based on a study last night that came out, also the impact of well waters and aquifers. And the only thing which...
Thank you, sir. Sorry, we were leaning.
Yep, understood.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. And now we do have your presentation. Is that correct?
You have both my presentation and you have two of the most relevant reports that I cited here for your planners to study, and there is other information should they so wish.
Okay, so before you leave, we have a question from Councillor Moffat. Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. We just a comment to thank you for coming here today, and also just to remind. I think I've shared with you in the past that there will be the opportunity to discuss this as the city develops its zoning bylaw for the entire city, because we aren't just updating the previous zoning bylaw, we're drafting a new one, which is something we haven't done in many years. So that'll be the opportunity, and there will be obviously immense consultation on that process. And in the meantime, it's also important to know to anyone listen, Mike knows this, but to anyone listening, that there is no current process to apply for industrial wind turbines of the nature presented in the report in Ontario at the moment. Of course, we know that could always change, but it does look like things should line up well for the city, considering potential setbacks in zoning against any potential future development application that could come should the province create a new process to do so. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Can I follow up and find out how and if we can engage in that later process? May I send you an email?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you can send me an email. I can get you in touch with the staff leads on it so they can give you a better idea of engagement process and whatnot.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time.
No, and I'm sure, Mike, you know, our colleague, he's the chair of the environment committees as well. Okay, with that, we'll receive the presentation, and next meeting is May 5th, adjournment. We're adjourned. Thank you very much, folks, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.